This is IAQ Radio, Indoor Air Quality Radio, the voice of the indoor air quality industry, with your hosts, Radio Joe Hughes and the Z-Man, Cliff Zlotnick. And now, Radio Joe Hughes.
Good day and welcome to IAQ Radio Plus. It's episode 752, and this week we welcome the world's most interesting engineer, Chris White. Before we get started, let's thank our sponsors. They're the reason we can continue doing the show. IAQ Radio Association sponsors are IICRC, the Institute for Inspection, Cleaning, and Restoration Certification at iicrc.org. The Restoration Industry Association, RIA, at restorationindustry.org. The Environmental Information Association, EIA, at eia-usa.org. IAQ Radio industry sponsors are Particles Plus at particlesplus.com, BioPlanet at byoplanet.com, Tramex Meters at tramexmeters.com, EMSL Analytical Inc. at emsl.com.
And now you can win a cool prize. It's time for the IAQ Radio Trivia question. Be the first to correctly answer. Simply email your answer to czlotnick at cs.com. Or if listening live, just text your answer from your computer. And now, here's the Z-Man.
Hello, everyone. Congratulations go out to Dawn Weeks, Ottawa, Ontario, Canada, who was first to correctly identify the stethoscope as the medical tool invented in the 19th century that drew physicians' attention away from the oral testimony of their patients when diagnosing asthma and turning it towards the search for clinical signs. Here's today's IAQ Radio Trivia question. According to an article in The Balance, what is the number one reason engineers quit their jobs? Back to you, Joe.
Sounds like an interesting one there, Cliff. All right, Chris White is the vice president of Win L. White Consulting Engineers, Inc. He's a third-generation professional engineer and a LEED Accredited Professional. He's also an LSU grad. He works locally and nationally with clients and has been instrumental in solving complex indoor air quality problems and reducing environmental risks. Most notable disaster response work was as a project manager for response projects after Katrina and Rita in 2005, the 2016 Baton Rouge flood, and Hurricanes Laura and Ida in 2020 and 2021. Well, you're right there in Hurricane Alley, huh, Chris? Welcome.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Great to see you. You and I kind of started out on the same path here in this industry, in the good old asbestos world. Before we go into that, though, I'm kind of curious, what got you interested in the career path of your father and grandfather, engineering?
You know, the funny thing about that is it's not really, it's not what I set out to do originally. When the asbestos work started to take off, I graduated from high school in '88, and instead of running the roads doing who knows what I would have wound up doing, I started working in schools surveying for asbestos that summer. And it was a great job. I made really good money for just a high school graduate at the time. And that was just my summer job. And then I got into college, and the next summer, of course, asbestos abatement started going, and I was doing air monitoring on asbestos abatement projects. But even then, that was not going to be my career. I wasn't studying engineering in school at the time. I've got a degree in history from LSU because I was going to either teach history or go to law school, and just I graduated, got out, and just didn't follow either of those paths. And so I started working full time for the company. And I guess about a year in, I was talking to Win, my dad, and he said, well, look, if you're gonna do this long term, and if you want to own the company one day, you need to get your degree in engineering and get licensed. And so I looked into that and went back to school and got my degree, and here we are all those years later. But it was not the original plan, but then that's how it wound up working out.
Just out of curiosity, how many more years of school did it take to get your engineering degree after getting a history degree? Or did you have a history and teaching degree? Or that's what my degree's in
It's,
actually, is teaching.
okay, yeah, it's actually just it was a Bachelor of Arts in History that I got, so not even a teaching certificate.
And not in the
And
sciences either. Well, the
right,
hard
right.
sciences.
Yeah. And so when I went back to school, and of course it took a while. It took me 7 years once I went back to school, calendar years, but it academic years didn't take that long because there were times I'd take a break for off a semester because we'd have a lot of work going on and I couldn't juggle work and going to school, but I was going to school full time hours wise and then working full time. So it took a while. And then along the way, met my wife, got married, and started a family. And so that I graduated right as kind of all of that was starting off. So it was an exciting time, definitely an unconventional path, but people who know me probably would say I'm an unconventional type of person, so that's not really surprising.
Cliff, let me turn it over to you, buddy.
Well, working with your dad, any tips for working and sharing responsibilities in a family business you can give our listeners?
I don't think this is going to be terribly original, but I think learn learn every job in the company. Learn what everybody does, or as much as you can about what everybody does, and that helps. It helps, especially in a small business, because we're a small firm. So it helps in a small business because if there's a lot going on and you got to jump in and pitch in, you have more, just the old saying, many hands make light work. And so you're able to do that. The the good thing about the way I started in the business is it was an entry level position, working in the, we call it, in the field, going back to, I guess, the old surveying days, because we're a civil engineering firm really at our core. But I worked in the field, so I was working on projects all the time, and that was a really good background because I had that knowledge of what we needed to do at a school, whether it was on a survey project or an inspection project, or if we were doing asbestos abatement, what I needed to do on the air monitoring side to make sure that the project hopefully was successful. So that was a good start for me. And then I had to move into learning how to work in an office. I mean, okay, so you know how to do these projects and make them happen, and now you have to get these reports done, and I mean, you have to make money, which is, how do I figure out how to make money doing this? And so my parents both have been exceptional teachers in that sense, as far as, I think, instilling in me the the ethical approach to doing the work, but then also it is a business and we have to work as a business. And so learning as much as you can about how everybody in the company does what they do so that you can jump in and help. And then one day, if you're moving into that role, it makes that transition a bit easier. And then when you get older, of course, I've gotten older, and now you have young people come in and work for you, and you can turn around and you can try to instill the values, the work ethic, and the skills. You can show them what you've learned.
Speaking of the core values, let's talk about that. What are the core values really of Win White's company, or Win, Engineering?
Yeah, the shorthand answer, I'd say, is it's the Win White way. That's a phrase that we use internally, and we've started to try to coin that in a way to relate to clients, or people that we want to have as clients when we're talking about how we work. But the Win White way, and it's a combination of a couple of things. Dad's been a Rotarian for a long time, and I'm a Rotarian also. But the four-way test, that if you've been to a Rotary club, but you can distill it down to service above self. So we take service to our clients, to our community, very seriously. When we do our projects, we also incorporate the the engineering ethics that we that we really cling to, that we're to safeguard the public's health, welfare, and safety. That's one of the things that as licensed professional engineers that we're committed to do. So in everything we do, we try to perform acts of service, and then we also try our best to safeguard the public's health, welfare, and safety. We take that seriously.
Chris, why do you call yourself the world's most interesting engineer? Isn't that a bit, I don't know, presumptive? I'm going to say. Cliff had another word in the question. I'm going to say presumptive.
Yeah, the funny thing about that is I never intended for that to come across as arrogant. I was trying to really be funny, and of course that just tells you a little bit about engineers and our personality and our humor, or lack of personality and humor, I guess. But if you guys remember from way back, Dos Equis had the most interesting man in the world series of commercials.
Oh, yeah.
And I still think those are probably the best commercials I've ever seen. I would watch those commercials and just laugh. And at the time, I was starting up the blog on the website, and I needed a name to call it. And so I said, well, I'll pick the world's most interesting engineer, because nobody thinks engineers are interesting. Nobody. I mean, except other engineers, or we might think our projects, our work, those are interesting. Yeah, but when I talk to people about, if they ask me about a project or something like that, I get all revved up and want to talk about it. And you can, about 15 seconds in, you can see, it's almost like if they had the TV ticker across their head. It's like, I wonder what's on the buffet at the casino tonight, or what's on TV tonight. I do not want to listen to this anymore. And so I picked that just kind of to poke fun at my own profession and at ourselves. But a lot of people it kind of rub people the wrong way. And that's not what I intended, but that in itself is funny, I think.
Yes, sir. Yes,
How far
sir.
did you take it?
Not far at all. I mean, I
Yeah.
just, there were a couple of times where I kind of wrote up a couple of things that were like the most interesting man in the world, like my blood smells like math, and
Right.
just things like that. But if I had it to do over again, maybe we would have made some stupid, funny videos, or try to, and then put those out just to do it, because that kind of stuff is fun to do, but didn't really go anywhere with it.
Chris, how many people do you have? How many employees do you have at Win White Consulting
We
Engineering?
have we have 7 employees.
Okay.
So Win and I we're the only engineers, and we have a young engineering graduate that actually works remote, and then we have a few employees that work basically every day out of the office, whether it's at a petrochemical facility or school, hospital, whatever it is. And then we have my mother works here in the office, I'll call it the back office kind of thing. And then we have an assistant that works with us. So,
No,
and very good people.
I did asbestos back in the same time period as you, 88, 89, 90, and it
Yes.
was just insane, crazy, busy. They hired people that had no business being out in the field doing this kind of work, to be honest with you. If it was a warm body, we took them. But
Right.
you know what? Let's get a little into the asbestos and lead world. How much work is still out there? Is it a good percentage of what you do at Win White?
Yeah, wow, there's so much asbestos work yet to be done. I don't I don't know if I could even hazard a reliable guess. If let's say as a nation, we just made it a national priority to get all the asbestos out of our buildings, I think it'd take 100 years, just because it's in so many buildings, where we don't even know that it's there yet. We'd have to do renovation or demolition, substantial demolition, just to get to it, to find it. So it it's there's a ton of work out there still, and the same really for lead. And of course, lead's been in the news a little bit more here lately with all the water the water system data and testing, and then concerns about lead and water, which I think is a good thing because it's something, those are issues that we've neglected for a long time that I think we do need to get about addressing. But the task is so monumental that it's going to take decades to make a dent in that. I mean, look at projects that you guys see around just where you live, and infrastructure projects, say streets or drainage or something like that. Look how long it takes just to do that, and just kind of multiply that out by the number of buildings, water systems, everything else that we have that we would have to deal with.
Yeah,
Oh,
it
go ahead,
doesn't
Cliff.
seem like lead would be readily water soluble. So does it take an acid acidity of the water or something like that in order to dissolve it?
Yeah,
Or is it friction, or how does it get in the water?
it's a combination of things, and then just as pipes deteriorate over time, you can have the whatever the materials the pipes made out of, you can have that material either leach out or just actually just kind of disintegrate, or not using the right word, but just it'll start to just scour out, and then all of a sudden it's in the stream of water that's coming out of the tap. And we're not talking about it right now, but it's kind of like the water lines that are made out of asbestos. It's the same thing. As those pipes age, you can see concentrations of lead or asbestos or whatever other contaminant that you're concerned about that can start showing up in the water that comes out of the tap.
Chris, did you follow any of the reports about lead? I believe it was in the air even after the wildfires out in Los Angeles. What are your thoughts
Yeah,
on
I
that?
didn't. Yeah, I didn't really do a deep dive into the data itself, but I wasn't surprised. I mean, anytime there's a disaster, a hurricane, storm, flood, and in this case, fires, where we're talking about catastrophic damage. Obviously, if you've seen whether in Maui or in California, the the damage to those structures, and now you've got it's ash, dust, everything else. That's a whole lot different than, say, in a storm, a flood, whatever it is, where you've got this ash, dust, and everything else, and it's out there on the ground, it's in the air, it's all over the place. And so you would expect to find lead, asbestos, and other things in the air. And then, okay, well, at what concentrations is it measured at, and what do you do? But not really surprised at all. My heart breaks for all of those people. We we do try to help after storms and disasters. We kind of put things out on our social media that says, if if we can help in any way, we'll do whatever we can for a homeowner or a business owner, even for free. I'd rather talk to somebody for 5 minutes and try to give them the best advice that I can on how they can clean up and start the recovery process, but also at the same time, hopefully not have the other unintended consequences, or other unintended environmental problems that we often have after a disaster. It's really easy. You guys know this. It's really easy to fixate on mold after a flood or a hurricane, and you want to go in and you want to gut a business, a school, a house, and you might need to, but you get so fixated on mold that you don't stop and check for asbestos and lead and PCBs and mercury or whatever other things you can run into.
Chris, like I said, I started out in the asbestos world many, many years ago, and we were taking
Yeah.
sample after sample. I mean, inside containment, outside containment, personal samples on the employees, outside where the negative air machines exhausted, outside in general. Uh, is that still happening today, or has that been found to be a bit of overkill, and now we're consolidating that somewhat?
It's still happening. We are still doing it. There's one petrochemical client that we have. We work for them since 1996, and when they do an asbestos abatement project, unless it's such a short duration that you can't get enough sample volume to get that limited detection on that sample down to a pretty decent number, we're going to do asbestos air monitoring. on that project along at the perimeter of the area where they're working, and a representative sample size on the crew. And that's for that petrochemical client. On our school projects, we follow the AHERA regulations that you guys are familiar with, where we do like what you mentioned, we do the sampling outside the containment, outside the negative air machine or AFD exhaust. We do that. And so we're doing that pretty much every day.
Hmm.
Yep, all day, all week, 12 months a year.
One thing that has changed significantly is the cost of those samples and the analysis of those samples. Can you give our audience a little an idea of what things cost nowadays?
Yeah, well, the funny thing about it, we were talking about this earlier, but you and I both started back in ye olden days, and especially on the school abatement project side, where you go out, you do some air sampling, and you do PCM sampling and analysis, or for just area, maybe personal, just in and out of the containment, using just a regular optical microscope. And you can still ship those out to laboratories and get those done. We started off doing that analysis ourselves early on. Trying to think. I let's see, I was trained to do PCM analysis in 93 or so. It's been a long time. So we would do that, and we would provide that as a service, of course, to our clients, to be able to do that pretty much in real time. As far as the clearance sampling and analysis, if you're doing transmission electron microscopy or TEM, we used to, and we still do pretty much, you'd have to ship those samples off. And back in the late 80s, at least here in Louisiana, there were no labs anywhere near us that had an electron microscope. So we shipped those samples off, and you might wait 2 weeks for a sample. And those samples, at a minimum, even waiting 2 weeks, they were several $100s each. And we're talking about in 1988 or 1989 money. Nowadays, we're all spoiled. I kind of, at times, I know I sound like old man get off my lawn when I'm talking to not clients so much, but when I'm talking to contractors and even some of our employees, when they express some impatience at getting results back. And now you can get clearance sample results maybe same day, if you're there in town, if you have a lab in town that can do it, and if you've got a really good relationship with that lab, you can get those samples done that day, or at the latest next day. I mean, if you had told me that when we first started doing these types of projects, I'd have said, there's no way, we'll never get there. And so what started off as being several $100s per sample, and if you were doing just the 5 inside samples, you could have, it could be a $3,000 clearance set, maybe more. And now, depending on the sample turnaround time, and if you got a pretty good deal with your lab, you might get a set of 5 TEM samples for $350, which is,
Mhm.
I mean, and so we're not talking about late 80s money. I mean, $350 is still a lot of money, but compared to $3,000 30 something years ago, I mean, it's astronomical.
Yeah. And the time is a big thing too, how long you have to wait. Cliff, let me turn it over to
Yeah.
you.
Yeah. Speaking of asbestos, I was reading an article actually in the Cleaning and Restoration magazine, and one of the guests that we had, the Moore family with ATI, they did this huge project out in California. There was a Marine Corps base in this building that had a lot of asbestos in it, caught on fire, and
Yeah.
was significantly damaged. And on this property, there were, I don't know, maybe 10 or 15 schools. I think there were something like 2,500 houses, and so on
Wow.
and so forth. And they kind of managed this entire thing. So, I just never, considered a, single project to have that much impact on the environment and on the things
Sure.
around them. But it really makes you think, and you've kind of verified that this stuff does happen. Pretty scary.
Yeah, yeah. It's something that we still have to take seriously. I mean, the good thing I think about the way a lot of people started in the asbestos business in particular was we were all I'm scared of asbestos. We treated it with respect. It's like, okay, if you're gonna do an asbestos abatement project, if you're gonna go try to remove it or disturb it, there's a way to do it, there's a way not to do it. And it's okay to pump the brakes and wait before you start to make sure that you're going to do it the right way. And so containments, asbestos abatement containments, work areas were prepared and maintained and kept up the right way. And people were also back then the regulatory agencies could show up at any time, and they still can, but they would show up at any time to do an inspection or a site visit. And people were a little bit scared of that because they didn't want to they didn't want to face the consequences of getting a violation and having to respond. And I would like not the fear, but just the taking the seriousness of asbestos abatement or just asbestos in general. I would like for that mindset to have endured better than what it has, but it really, in my opinion, hasn't. At least here where we work a lot of times, and it's a shame because it that has been avoidable, but it's trying to get some contractors or even owners to take disturbing asbestos and renovation and demolition projects seriously sometimes is very difficult. And I'm sure you guys in your audience they have similar stories to this, I'm sure.
I have
Oh,
one
yeah.
question. I remember growing up when the brakes on all the automobiles, contained asbestos. And I suspect that a lot of what would be found in outdoor air samples, may have come from, automobile brake systems and transportation and so on and so forth. When you check, outside samples today versus when you first started, did you find a lot more outside before than you generally find now, or?
It's been pretty consistent as far as we don't do outdoor air samples using TEM, so we use PCM, and of course, if you're doing phase contrast microscopy, when you look at that, it's an optical microscope, and when you look at the sample under the scope, you're counting fibers, just any fiber. If it meets that, there's a certain criteria if you're following the analytical method, and so if you see a fiber, you count it. And based on kind of like the air monitoring that I started doing in the late 80s all the way until now. I mean, every once in a while, I'll on occasion have to go cover a job and analyze samples. But when I analyze outdoor samples or even in a containment area that's outside the containment area, really don't pick up that much asbestos. So that's the good news. Now, if we ran them TEM, I don't know what we would find. Now, I will tell you this, that after a disaster, especially when people have collected a lot of outdoor samples and analyzed them using TEM, you'll see some actual, TEM detects asbestos. And there are some of those TEM air samples where they actually did find some amount of outdoor asbestos.
All right, let's go to our halftime. We'll be back with the second half. We've got Chris White from L. White Consulting Engineers, world's most interesting engineer. Association sponsors are the Environmental Information Association. EIA's multidisciplinary membership collects, generates, and disseminates information concerning environmental and occupational health hazards in the built environment at eia-usa.org. The IICRC, a nonprofit standards development and certifying body for the cleaning and restoration industry, IICRC.org. The Restoration Industry Association, the oldest and largest nonprofit professional trade association dedicated to providing leadership and promoting best practices through advocacy, standards, and professional qualifications for the restoration industry at restorationindustry.org. Industry sponsors are Particles Plus, feature-rich particle counters and air quality instrumentation. Count on us, particlesplus.com. BioPlanet at byoplanet.com, improving human, animal, and environmental health with electrostatic spray technology and advanced chemistries at byoplanet.com. Tramex Meters, innovation in moisture detection and humidity monitoring systems since 1974 at tramexmeters.com. EMSL Analytical Inc., providing high quality, full service laboratory services since 1981. EMSL.com. All right, we're back. Cliff, let me let you start off the second half here.
Thanks, Joe. Let's change direction just for a little bit. Based on where you're at, you folks get a lot of storms, weather, hurricanes, and so on and so forth. And I guess it's really a two-part question. Is there anything new in terms of storm recovery? And the other is, are you doing anything differently because your mind has changed? And the industry has changed, the way that they used to do it versus the way that they do it now.
Yeah, so as far as storms and disasters, some new things that we're seeing, and this first thing is it's taken a while to kind of come in and set, but I think a lot more people now, after the way we've seen some of these disasters play out in the last several years, it underscores the importance of planning. So I think a lot more people are either they were already pre-planning, or now they've realized that they need to plan before the next storm season happens. And so finding their response team, their consultants, contractors, making sure they've got all their insurance, maybe some condition assessments, some data to have that you have time to get now, so that you can have that in hand, and hopefully you never need it. But if you get hit with a disaster, you have to go out and get all of that. You have to engage the professionals to come in and help you. But if you can get them lined up beforehand, so that once you're able to get back into your building, once the roads are passable, once you're able to get back and figure out what you're going to do, you can get about doing it. So I think that's something new that we're starting to see, at least across our region, and that's encouraging, because we've been trying to get people to do that for a while. As far as the day-to-day or the kind of project by project things that I've been seeing more of, I'm really excited about the technology that we all have now. The cameras that we can use using drone technology, everybody loves Matterport, and I mean, I do too, but really any 360-degree camera that you can use as a system to generate a walkthrough of a facility, and especially those are great to do before a disaster, because you can get that data and you can have a walkthrough of your school, your place of business, your home, whatever it is, and you can have that before disaster hits. And then once you move into a response and recovery mode and you're trying to assess the damage, you can do that, and then so you have a comparison. And it's really helpful to show that kind of information to insurance and FEMA. So I'm really excited about that, and how you can integrate that with drone footage of your site, whether it's just your building, or if you've got a big property where you got a lot of fencing, let's say, and you want to document the condition of the fencing before disaster hit. That's very useful. And then the monitoring capabilities that we have now. I was when we were at Pete's session and we were talking about the data logging. I mean, data loggers have been around for a long time, where you can take a device and you can put it somewhere in a hallway in a school, and you can let it sit there for a week, and it measures It collects whatever measurements that you have, and then you go back and you get it, and you can go put that on your laptop, and you can evaluate it, and then you can make a report with it. That is fantastic. I've been a fan of that for a long time. But what we were talking about with the real time data logging and the reporting to the cloud capability, where now if you're trying to dry out a school, let's say you're a restoration contractor and you've been charged with establishing a certain temperature and relative humidity inside a school, you have these devices now where you can put them out wherever you want in the school, and it as long as that thing's able to communicate to the cloud, it can send that data up there, and you can be anywhere on your phone. You can be back at your office, or if you're working on response projects, you're probably driving like crazy between all of these sites. And okay, don't do this while you're driving, but you can pull this kind of stuff up on your phone, and you can see that, okay, at 3 o'clock this morning, we had this school, we had the temperature and relative humidity where we needed it to be. And I love that, because I think it helps all of us. It helps us communicate and report more effectively. And I think it can help us speed up and be more effective in the process of recovery.
Chris,
As far
go ahead.
as what, yeah, the second, I just remembered the second part of the question. The what we kind of changed our minds on. I don't know so much as part of restoration or response, but the thing that I thought of that we've been kind of wrong, maybe, or we got wrong, was just starting in the late 80s here in Louisiana anyway. We were just getting into the asbestos regulations. Everybody was kind of learning what that was going to be like. And we were a couple, 3 years in, and we would go to refresher training for asbestos, and you start talking about other stuff because you can only talk about asbestos for so long. But the topic of the lead regulations started to come up. Okay, we're going to have some lead regulations coming, and this is coming from, we have a Department of Environmental Quality here in Louisiana. I know different states call their agencies different things, but the folks at DEQ said, okay, the lead regs are coming, they're coming, they're coming. And then it took years to get there. And then when they did, it pretty much fell flat. And so we were starting to gear up for that, and it just kind of fizzled. And we're seeing more of an emphasis on it now, but look how far along we are. We're 37 years
Yeah.
into doing a whole lot of asbestos work, and just over the last handful of years, we've started to see that. And then the other thing that I would say is, I really, you guys remember back in the 90s when EPA really started talking about indoor air quality, and there was the talk of indoor air quality regulations. And I thought, okay, well, yeah, they kind of jumped the shark with some of the asbestos stuff. So yeah, we're going to go ahead and we're going to be full bore doing indoor air quality. And except for some guidance and some programs, that really hasn't taken off. I mean, even to the point, I don't know about y'all, but when I say the phrase indoor air quality to some people, it's almost like I said a curse word almost, because I guess the thought of it left such a bad taste in a lot of people's mouth that there was, I guess, pushback, and it didn't happen. So I'd say that I'd say that on lead and on indoor air quality, we were ready to go, and we thought it would be a thing, but just never came about.
Even since COVID?
Not really. I mean, I thought if anything, we're ever going to bring indoor air quality in particular into an emphasis area, it would have been COVID. And I, I mean, I'll never forget. I was at a Louisiana School Facility Managers Association meeting, and there was somebody from the Louisiana Department of Health there to talk about operating during COVID. And I thought, man, this is great, because this guy, this is an MD. You're not, I mean, you don't need to listen to me tell you about health effects on really anything other than asbestos, let's say, because I'm not a doctor and I'm not going to play one. But here's an MD coming in and going to talk about. I was looking for tips on how to clean a school and then how to run and maintain the HVAC system. And what ended up happening was just it was a lecture on guidelines like masking and vaccines and kind of really, if I'm being honest, kind of talking down to some people. So the practical tips that a facility manager would want and need, none of that happened.
Hmm.
But yeah, to your point, other than maybe talking about filtration a little bit more than we usually do, I don't think that indoor air quality really took the role or the significance in the pandemic that what it could have and should have.
Interesting. Something you mentioned there just led me to this question in the chat. It looks like mesothelioma is only showing up in asbestos workers and their families, but not in building occupants. Do you know of any in building occupants, which challenges EPA's advice to the public as a precaution? He still favors managing asbestos-containing materials in place, using effective controls when disturbed. I remember back then there was the one fiber theory, right? That's probably what you were referring to earlier. Irving Selikoff, Dr. Selikoff, and that one fiber could cause mesothelioma, which I guess is potentially possible. Um, any comment on that chat log?
Gosh, well, yeah, when you bring up the single fiber theory, I remember, and of course, I was a stupid punk kid hearing this in my contractor supervisor class.
Yep.
And of course at the time we couldn't train enough people fast enough to get out on these projects. So I was in a hotel ballroom with probably 200 other students learning, I'm getting a crash course and I'm going to go run a crew, but really I was there so that I could go out and do air monitoring on projects. But they dropped that single fiber theory, and we all looked at each other like, "Oh, we're going to die,"
What are we
because
getting
no
into
way.
here, man?
Yeah, there's no way you're going to go and do this job and not breathe one fiber at some point. So, okay, well, we're going to die. And I don't know. It's an interesting discussion topic, especially so many years later. But man, talk about far out there. But as far as a building occupant, I mean, there's some anecdotal stories and just really stories of people that have contracted mesothelioma, and they can't really tie it back to, well, I worked in construction as a summer job for a couple of summers and I was cutting transite siding, and that has to be where it was from. Or I was installing asbestos insulation back in the 60s, or who knows what. So there are some people that they will tell you that, well, it must have been at my school, it must have been at my university, or some combination thereof. And so there are people you'll talk to that'll say that, but I would venture a guess that most of the people that contract asbestosis or mesothelioma worked in some sort of construction trade over the years, or maybe they were at a site where, or they lived near a site where there was contamination or something.
Yeah,
But I'd
maybe
say
like
that that's probably more the case. Kind of like some of the, if you're familiar with some of the folks in the Libby, Montana
yep.
area, where a lot of those folks, I mean, they just lived there and they have a really high rate of lung diseases and abnormalities and things.
I had a comment from Wynn that we had a school client that had a student claim mesothelioma caused at their school, but outside of the legal costs of defending the case, it didn't go anywhere. I want to get back into
Yeah.
the restoration side of things and the disaster restoration side of things. What's the current um, client? I don't know the right term, but when it comes to mold, are people starting to get a little more relaxed about the fact that, they've got a little bit of mold and we can stop the moisture problem, clean it up and fix it up? Or are people still getting kind of maybe overly concerned about some of these issues?
It's a mixed bag. And a lot of times I think, especially when it comes to restoration, I think there are a lot of times when we go in and we'll start working on a building, and people will maybe want to take out way too, well, like ceiling tiles, let's say. If you have a school that got hit, I've seen people that go in and they want to remove and replace all the ceiling tiles in the entire school, whether they need to be removed and replaced or not. And they might want to start demolishing a bunch of sheetrock, and some of it could stay, some of it needs to go, or maybe we could kind of wait. And especially if we control the environment in the school, maybe we can take a wait and see approach and make the expense not so severe as far as running up the ticket. So you got that on one hand, and then on the other hand, you can be walking through a school and they're taking all the ceiling tile out, and you walk right by some gypsum where there is mold growing on there on the sheetrock, and we need to either clean that up right now, or if we need to demolish that and remove and replace, as long as we're sure that we've cured the water problem, and they just blow that off and leave it. And we ran into that one of the it's funny now. It was not very funny at the time, but there was a school that we were working in after Hurricane Laura, and that is precisely what was happening. There was a contractor that was in the act of removing all of the ceiling tiles, and most of them were good, and they were destroying them as they were taking them out. And then the cafeteria had mold all over the tables and a lot of the serving line equipment and all that. And if they had gotten in and stabilized the cafeteria and the kitchen and cleaned it up, they wouldn't have grown mold in there.
Right, right. All right, let's go to the roundup here. That's a good thing. Thanks. Better yet. All right, the roundup's brought to us by TramXmeters.com today. Let's get the restoration industry global watchdog, Pete Consigli. There
Yeah.
he is. All right, Pete.
Yeah. See, you got the IAQ radio right there.
All
And,
right.
yeah.
Get mine. It's here somewhere.
Yeah. Well, anyway, listen, interesting show. So uh, most of us have probably heard of the Rotary clubs, and a lot of times, you'll see they have meetings at restaurants and things like that. But when I heard Chris say that him and Win were Rotarians, I didn't really know what that meant, so I looked it up, and it's a very interesting definition because it says whoever started the Rotary clubs, it's a club of people that are to get together for service, like Chris said. But it specifically said, but they do not take that. It's not a religious based or political based organization. I'm thinking, what a novel idea that is, because most of us, when we're kids, we learn whenever the family gets together, they'll talk about religion and politics. So I guess now we know what it is to be a Rotarian. So good for you there, Chris and Wynn. This whole
But
topic.
Pete, that should have a lot of meaning to you, because like cooking stuff on a rotisserie and all that other stuff, you should have picked that up.
Yeah, well, I just never knew. All those years that I lived in California, one of my associates out there was a member of the Masons. If anybody's ever done any, real research into the Masons, I mean, that dates back to Ben Franklin and the founders. But the reason I bring it up is that they used to clean the carpets once a year at the local Mason club, and they had a really thick, heavy wool carpet. And so what this fella did, who organized the cleaning and was a member of the club, is he specified that as part of the cleaning process, they had to bring air movers and dehumidifiers in to dry it, because if it dried really slow, it would create problems. And anybody knows when you get wool wet, it kind of smells like a wet dog. But that also lends me to the asbestos topic, because Mike McGinnis, our friend, and people who are listen to the podcast are familiar with Mike from Jersey. One of Mike's clients is the school district for the state of New Jersey, and he says what's happened there over the years, they clean the carpets during the summer, obviously when there's nobody in school. And he says, unfortunately, the one thing that they haven't done in years, and maybe it's been corrected now, is that they don't adjust the settings in the HVAC systems in there, which have different settings when the buildings are unoccupied. So he said traditionally what's happened is there's no maintenance people are in the building. They clean the carpets and they don't dry for whatever particular reason, and it creates huge mold problems. And so over the years, Mike used to say they had to use asbestos protocols to actually remove the carpet because it was so mold infested. They had to set up containment and everything because otherwise they would just distribute the mold spores all over the place. So it's kind of interesting. A lot of people, when we got into mold, start using that term asbestos abatement protocols. I was fortunate enough when I was an active contractor in California years ago, throughout the 80s and in the early 90s, to have to deal with asbestos. And there was the whole changing thing in the marketplace. The insurance companies didn't understand why it cost $1,000 to, let's say, remove a bathroom floor, 5x7 bathroom that had asbestos, versus if it was non-asbestos, maybe it was $100 to rip it up. And so I did a lot of research on it. And Cliff, you may or may not remember this, but in the mid-90s, I actually gave a presentation at an RAA, we're called ASCR back in the day, on dealing with asbestos from a contractor's perspective, and specifically under California law, because the federal regulations, the states can override that if they make something more stringent. But California used to have a thing, I don't know if they do anymore, called was a 2-hour awareness program. And it was designed for people to be aware of asbestos, if they came in contact with it. And I agree with what Chris said. There's still so much out of there. Take years to remove it, and people kind of got lax, and they kind of forgot about asbestos. And then when the lead came on, that kind of dominated the conversation. But understanding the difference between friable and non-friable, what all the materials that asbestos is in, and then the other big thing is who's ultimately responsible for the dumping of the asbestos. Well, it's actually the homeowner. So if they don't hire the right people, if they don't ensure that they get the manifest and that asbestos is done properly by someone who has the proper certificates to be an asbestos hauler, and let's say the truck overturns on the highway and the asbestos goes all over the place, the actual owner of that asbestos, which is the property owner, is actually technically liable for everything. A lot of people don't know that.
Yeah.
So these kinds of things are, I think, pretty important if you're going to enter. And it is a zero tolerance. The whole one fiber thing you were talking about, I learned that zero tolerance. And anyway, there's still a lot of work out there in that area. And I think the one thing about the asbestos testing, it's a lot cheaper than the mold testing, and you can also get quick turnaround on it. Where, depending on what you're checking for mold, particularly if you do speciation, you got to allow it to grow, so it takes a long time. So I think all of those things are kind of important. Chris, the one thing that I remember, and I think that little story that you told at the end there about restoration, I remember talking to Win about this after one of those. There were a couple, 2-3 years in a row where Louisiana got like 6 hurricanes, and now the last 4 years, it seems that Florida has been getting hurricanes, but it's kind of cyclical. And I guess some of your clients with the school districts where the restoration guys came in there and were maybe tearing things out that may or may not needed to be replaced. What are the issues that you all see? What lessons does the restoration industry need to understand if they want to come into these school districts, and particularly in Cajun country? That is another whole unique set of circumstances. But in just dealing with properties after a disaster, what kind of little pointers could you give, that can kind of help the industry better understand how to deal with those kinds of issues. I mean, Win had definitely mentioned the possibility of trying to do training in the off season before the hurricane season for some of these school districts and some of the people who make these decisions. But oftentimes there's never enough time to do those kind of things. If you got any pointers Cliff could put in the blog, it may be helpful.
That's a great question. And I think whether it's a restoration or a response project, I think to make sure that everybody, the owner, the contractor, if you're working with a consultant, that everybody understands exactly what the scope of work is on the project, and everybody has a clear understanding as far as the expectations, and then what project completion looks like. I think what how do we know that we were successful? Or if we haven't met the success criteria, what do we do to keep going until we are successful and we know that the job's complete, so that you don't end up with those miscommunications before the project really even starts. I think if we had it to do over, well, with this project, the problem mainly was we came in about 3 weeks into, I guess 3 weeks into the response. We were there ready on day one to help this particular client, but their insurance, the client's insurance, had contractor consultants. They had a whole team lined up, which sounds great, except when it came time to actually execute the project, it was a dumpster fire. And so I think part of that was a lot of these people that rode in from out of town ready to save us from ourselves. I think one fundamental thing they forgot was, this is not your building. This is not your school. And sometimes you need to ask the owner what they want, even if they're going to tell you something you don't want to hear. And then go about doing it if you can execute that. I'd say that's one thing.
Yeah, that's a really big thing. Um, are there any laws, specific laws that pertain to Louisiana that you know of that determines contractors doing work? I mean, Florida's got some of the toughest laws. California, a lot of the western states do. Certain states like Texas and others, they're pretty lax in the consumer laws, consumer affairs laws, and general contracting laws. Where do you think Louisiana stands in, you know, that realm?
We're too lax. I wish we were more like Florida on the consulting and on the contracting side, because here in Louisiana anyway, it's like anybody can show up and we can start doing air sampling for mold, or you can be a consultant and do all of this. And to be a remediation contractor, a licensed remediation contractor, it's really not all that difficult either. And I wish there were more training and qualifications required for every professional that's going to come in and do the work. So that's the main problem I see. The disaster response, a lot of the big companies, whether it's somebody that's regional or they're nationwide or a worldwide contractor that shows up, they're probably going to have pretty good project management show up, but they may bring in new people that don't have any project management experience, or they don't have any supervision experience, and that can be an issue. But that also, you can correct that if you give them the right guidance as you get underway in the project.
Well, listen, Chris,
Yeah.
well, I'll go ahead and finish, but I see we're a
Well,
couple after one, so I was going to turn it back to the boys.
Yeah, the state and the regional contractors, the ones that are here already, the good thing about those contractors, the reputable ones anyway, is they're already here working. You know they've got the capabilities to do it. And so hopefully between the large contractors and then the state regional contractors, you can do a good job of selecting the right contractor and getting it done.
Okay. Well, thanks
Thank
a
you,
lot.
Pete.
All right, Joe, turn it back to you, buddy.
Much appreciated. Chris, I got a quick question. What is in situation?
In situation is a name that we've given. I mean, lot of different products like this. It's a 360-degree walkthrough of a facility. So it's a camera. It's a 360-degree camera that you can take, and you can do imaging. You can do some outside a property, and then you go into a house, a school, hospital, whatever it is, commercial building, and you can generate enough images to create a 360-degree walkthrough. But then it's also got LiDAR technology built into it to where if you want, you don't have to do this, but as you go, it's collecting the measurements so that you can take that data and you can generate PDF floor plans with it. You can generate CAD drawings with it, and then also be able to have that data where you leave that site, you get that imagery up in the sky, and you can share a 360-degree walkthrough of the facility as you shot it at that time. And so in situations, our name for our system that we use for our projects and for our clients. And it's been extremely helpful. We've gotten into it over the last couple of years. We've used it successfully on many projects so far, both in helping clients share with their insurance folks. You can share with FEMA. I mean, you guys know especially when you have a disaster, FEMA at some point might want to actually come physically visit your site. And I encourage that. I think that's a good thing because if they see how serious the damage is at a site, it helps them wrap their head around it even better, I think, than if they're looking at just even good digital still images. It helps them to be able to do that. But especially with COVID, that really shut down a lot of travel for people. So being able to share a 360-degree walkthrough and you can pull it up on any device at any time saves the time, saves the travel, and it's repeatable. So you can get it before disaster, and then you can get it either as you're getting ready for remediation or restoration, or you can do it after.
Cliff, let me let you get the last question in here.
Okay, thanks. Let's, if you could just comment, you and I, when we met at Pete's event, you were showing me some slides, or I'm sorry, some photos of a LEED building that, ended up being a green building, all right. And I was just wondering if you could, tell our audience a little bit about that experience.
Yeah, so I have to preface this by saying because of the asbestos background and doing all the building surveys that we've done, I have an unavoidable habit when I walk into a building, even a building that I go in all the time, where I walk in and in order I go floor, wall base, wall, ceiling, and I'm looking for stuff, whatever it is, asbestos, lead, mold, who knows what. I'm looking for all these things. And so when we were there in Florida, and by the way, I had a great time. That 4 days of training was fantastic. Um, can't wait to go back. I enjoyed meeting you and everybody. It was just a great week. But as I was walking around the hotel, I went to go get some ice, and of course, first off, I'm kind of surprised. A lot of hotels, not all, but a lot of hotels have gone away, as you guys know, from using vinyl wall covering because of mold problems. Using mold from a maintenance and a cleanliness perspective, just on this, just at its surface, that could be a good idea because it's easy to clean and maintain. But because of the law of unintended consequences and the moisture problems and the mold that you can grow behind wall covering, a lot of chains we've seen go away from that. So I was shocked to see a hotel on the Florida Gulf Coast with vinyl wall covering. I mean, I was like, wow, look at this. And then I got to looking, and it was kind of bubbled a little bit, and there was one seam that was loose, and I just couldn't help it, and I went and pulled it back, and there it was. I mean,
Lo
I
and
didn't
behold.
test it. I didn't test it, but I'm pretty well. There's a lawyer friend of ours that taught us this phrase: it had materials exhibiting characteristics of mold. And so you see how it just rolled off the tongue. So anyhow, I got a kick out of that, took some pictures, and yeah, it was in a LEED silver building. And look, I'm a LEED accredited professional, and some of that stuff's a good idea. Some of it in practicality doesn't really work, but and the building's 2 years old, I think. And so they've already got,
Hey, Chris, that building was built during the pandemic. It opened
yeah.
up 2 days after Hurricane Ian hit, and Allstate were the first ones in there. They had their whole cat team tape over one of the meeting rooms, and then FEMA occupied the building. So it took 2 months before guests, the normal snowbird people, could
Oh,
come
wow.
in. And so anyway, those photos that you sent were interesting. That as Stebrick would say, it must have been a northern architect who designed that building.
Probably. Probably.
I did actually. I actually called and kind of quietly passed that on to my contacts there, and they were going to have somebody take care of it. So I think they appreciated the fact that you actually point. I never mentioned anything. I said, you may want to go up to this ice maker on a such and such floor.
Yeah, might want to look at that.
Poke
Yeah.
around, right, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, Chris,
I had a great time with y'all. It was the whole week was fantastic. Can't wait to go back.
Well,
Before
thank
we-
you.
before we go, Chris, is there anything you'd like to add? Anything we missed?
No, I think storm season's coming. So if you haven't already, start planning. And then if you get into cleanup, restoration, demolition, yeah, you want to take care of the water problems. Mold problems are serious, but don't forget that you can run into asbestos, lead, mercury, PCBs, other things. I'll put this out there, no strings attached. If I can ever help anybody, Cliff and Joe, Pete, if I can ever help you guys in any way, I'll be happy to. Anybody in the audience, I'll do whatever I can to help over the phone, FaceTime, text message, whatever. If you need help figuring out what to do to respond to a storm or disaster.
Well, thank you, Chris White,
you.
Vice President at Will White Consulting Engineers, Inc. Great job. Great show
Wait,
today.
we're going to give him the
Cliff.
final words there, Joe.
I'm sorry.
We're going to give the
Okay.
audience Chris's final words. Go ahead, hit
Chris's
it.
final words.
As the world's most interesting engineer, it's not often that I use drywall, but when I do, I use Chinese drywall. Stay corrosive, my friends.
Thank you.
Look how
man.
young I was.
Oh yeah, that was back in the day, huh?
Yeah.
All right.
Did you see how little gray I had in my hair? I
Yeah.
was using just for men.
You kept that hair a little shorter too back then.
That's right. That's right.
All right, guys. We appreciate you. Thanks a lot, Chris. Much
Hey,
appreciated.
thanks for having me on. It's great talking
Pete,
with y'all.
Thank
Our
you.
pleasure.
John, you gotta have faith. Thank you, sir. I'll be here if you need me.
For IAQ Radio, I'm Spike Reel saying thanks for listening.